welcome back. We've decided to switch things up a bit this morning in respect of our segment. So what we're going to do, we're going to discuss World Mental Health Day first. That being said, I have to my right Dr. Alejandro Matos. He's a psychiatrist. To his right is Ingrid Bonilla. She's a psychiatric nurse with the Central Health Region. Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
And on my left, I have my good friend Alex Evans. I have Khalia Gentle and Lucien Dawson. Right? These are all mental health advocates. Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Now, we're observing World Mental Health Day. And as I had mentioned just before the commercial break, that while we are aware of it, we don't discuss mental health issues enough. Oftentimes we hear when things go wrong and it's attributed to either a mental breakdown or what have you, but we don't have conversations in the open to discuss matters that affect us on a mental level. So that being said, it's a broad topic, very broad topic. We're all afflicted by different mental health issues. Let's begin, Dr. Matos, by encapsulating perhaps what it means, what is mental health, and what are some of the general issues or the more common ones that people grapple with.
Yes, mental health is part of the global health of the people. Remember that we are social, biological, and with psychics too. That means that we need to see the person integral. Mental health is the connection that we have with the rest of the community. The main problem that we have in mental health, the people think that usually is only schizophrenia, or when the people say crazy people. Absolutely no. Mental health is depression, anxiety, grief, post-trauma, family violence. All that is part of the global health. And this year, the World Health Organization have a slogan about that. We need to make mental health and well-being a global priority for all the people. And it's important that we are here talking about this subject.
So tell us, we were discussing that we have actually, that the UN recognized this day as World Mental Health Day for probably about 2 decades now. So perhaps Ms. Bonilla or Dr. Bonilla can chime in. And why is it that it still feels like it's taboo to talk about mental health in our society?
I feel that what happens is that when it comes to our society, we still have a long way to go. So it feels taboo because it's not something that we readily discuss. We ourselves, as mental health professionals at times, if you ask a mental health professional, are you seeing someone for the issues you're going through? Imagine the general public. If it is difficult for us to sometimes accept ourselves, seek help for ourselves, then everyone else might be having some difficulty as well. There is still stigma, but I must admit, I've seen it coming a longer way now. It's far different than it was 5 years ago, than it was 6 years ago. So I can tell you that for this year alone, how many people have reached out to us asking for us to come in, do presentations, and I'm talking from the school level, going into organizations. So yes, it feels taboo because unless you're in that community, you might not be hearing about it much.
Let's turn to these guys. We have you described as mental health advocates. Let's begin first of all by getting from you what either inspired you or what prompted you to take up this particular mantle. Let's start with you, Alex.
All right, morning again. For me, it was my own struggles with my own mental health that have prompted me to be a little bit more outspoken about it. In 2018, I was diagnosed with dysthymia, and with that, around that time, I was experiencing severe depression and severe anxiety. And from my own journey of learning how to manage my mental health, learning how to take better care of my mental health, and then later on seeing and understanding just how many people go through their own struggles has been the thing that has prompted me to want to speak about it more.
For me, I would say it's something similar, my own experiences with mental health. For a really long time, I didn't even realize that I had struggles with bouts of depression. And it wasn't until looking back in hindsight, I realized that from primary school, it was something that I would struggle with sometimes. I would become antisocial. I would sleep a lot because, as we were discussing before, depression is something that it drains you, physically, and that was something I struggled with. And throughout my life, I kind of used poetry as a coping mechanism, and it was when I began to take my poetry more seriously and began to share it publicly, and I got feedback from people saying, hey, I've experienced the things that you talk about in your poetry when it comes to what you struggle with, and I felt good knowing that I'm not the only person dealing with this. And hearing that, getting that response from people kind of motivated me to want to talk about it more, to want to let more people know that you're not alone in what you're struggling with, So I would definitely say my art and my poetry is one of the main things that led me to becoming more of an advocate for mental health.
So for me, it's a two-pronged. I have always struggled with mental health, with my mental health, and ignored the signs. And my wake-up call was in April of last year. I lost someone close to me because of suicide. And I have always struggled with suicide ideations. And that was my wake-up call to say that I needed the help. I needed to go and get help, because the morning of that incident, I saw the individual and they were smiling, and everything was normal. And when that happened, it totally broke me down. And so I went through a time of grief, and it was in that time of grief I realized that something was wrong. And I went to several mental health professionals, and then I also found out that I struggle with dysthymia as well. And that was when it became, full circle for me. Like, okay, now I understand why I had certain moods, or why I had certain mood swings, and why at the end of the day sometimes if I interact with people, it's so draining because of the condition that I am suffering with. And so from then I began to advocate for people to get the help that they need, because there's nothing wrong with asking for help. Nothing wrong.
I mean, I'm looking at that, the three of you, and very admirable for you to come up and to speak about your own struggles. But I imagine that you're all from about the same generation, right? And so I'm looking at that as a window of maybe why I'm hearing about it more, because for the four of us, we're kind of in that same run where we're openly talking about mental health. But what about persons from like my parents and my grandparents, that I can't tell them, hey, you have a problem and maybe we need to seek help? So how are we becoming more, how are we having more advocacy for this kind of problem?
Good point. The generations, yes, are more accepting at this time and do advocate more. And the older generation have been taught that you don't speak about certain things. So roping them in is a little bit difficult. You find that it's the relatives that would sometimes come in and say, you know what, I think my mom needs help, I think my dad needs help, but I don't know how to bring them for help. So usually it's having the conversation. That's the key thing. We must talk. And we can't tie a rope around them and say, let's go. You have to tell them. You have to educate them. And even if it comes to the point that you call us to do that education, yes, it's not as easy as it sounds. It's a little difficult, but the conversation is the key.
I think if we're looking at it from a generational point of view, the older generation is of a certain belief, a certain school of thought, where we're saying, look, only people who are crazy, quote unquote, need to see a counselor, a psychiatrist, or a mental health expert in any capacity, right?
Crazy or weak.
Or weak.
Weak.
Right?
Yeah.
But then we realize in our present time that it's not limited to only people with deep psychiatric issues. As you've mentioned, simple things like depression and how the mind and the heart works together when you're dealing with emotional issues that tend to become mental issues and what have you. I think it's only now that we're opening up a bit to have the dialogue openly, where you have young people who can come forward and say, you know what, something is off. I don't feel my normal self today. You don't wake up with that spunk or that excitement or what have you, and you know immediately that, you know, things are off. You have some people who are reclusive in terms of how they feel and how they manage how they feel and how they think, versus other people who can come out and say, look, I need to go see a mental health, you know, a professional, a counselor, somebody to guide me or interpret what I'm feeling, because sometimes we don't fully understand what it is that is different about us, and we need someone to kind of point us in a direction. Alex mentioned dysthymia. So did my good friend Mr. Dawson. And I don't know that the majority of people out there know what dysthymia is. Because if we are to give them a clinical definition of what it is now, they would be able to say, well, I have that, I feel the same way, you know? And it's unbeknownst to them what the actual term is or what have you. I'll ask Dr. Matos for you to explain that a bit for our viewing public.
Yeah, usually dysthymia is a condition that the people feel a lot of symptoms compatible with depression, like sadness, low energy, low appetite, increasing the time to sleep or decreasing the time to sleep, increasing the weight or decreasing the weight, and the capacity to work is a little bit decreased, the capacity to interact with the other people is decreased too, but don't reach the level of the severe depression. Okay, this is dysthymia. What happened with severe depression? Then the people is with a lot of trouble to work, with a lot of trouble to interact with society. Sometimes they don't like to eat absolutely at all when they have in severe depression. The people don't like to go to the bath, to take care about the hygiene, and start with suicidal ideas. By this reason, it's important to know the most important thing, I think, is the education about symptoms. You can be sad. It's different to depressed. Because we are human, we can be sad, we can be happy, we can be stressed, we can be anxious. But when this sadness interferes with our usual daily life, okay, the first sign of alarm, okay? When all these symptoms interfere with our capacity to work, with our capacity to interact with our sister, brother, daughter, is the second sign of alarm. And we can offer, like a mental health department, the attention. in public health, in public service, all the services are free. You can reach mental health in every district, and you can have access to psychotherapy, to psychiatry, with medication, absolutely free. And then I hope that this type of program can help the people to reach all the service of mental health.
Can you talk about some of the other, I guess, common mental health diseases that are out there in Belize that have come through your?
Before and after COVID pandemic, we have increased in the sign of anxiety. The people is a lot of nervous, trembling, with a lot of physical symptoms. Anxiety, most of the time, is linked with physical symptoms, like a problem to eat, problem to go with gastrointestinal problem, trembling, headache, backache. It's a lot of somatic symptoms. This is another one. After COVID, was increasing 25% in all the world. Depression and anxiety. And another usual, here in Belize, another problem is drugs.
Yeah.
Mental health disorder induced by drugs. I see in the clinical practice young people of 14, 13 years with psychosis due by marijuana. Because some part of the population think that marijuana is only a weed, is a natural and we can use it. Absolutely no, it's a drugs. And it's affecting the young generation of Belizean people. And most of them now are dealing with that problem. Anxiety due for drugs, psychosis due for drugs. What means psychosis? Psychosis is a loss of contact with reality. The people don't react in the usual way to reality. They are living in another world. In
Parallel existence.
Exactly. And that is affecting a lot of people here in Belize. And this is another topic that we need to speak about that.
Earlier we were discussing the conversation itself. And I had alluded that maybe we don't talk about it enough, or we do. So from your standpoint, and I know Lucien said no, we don't talk about it enough. So from your standpoint, what can be done more so that we can continue to have the conversation? At what level would you like to see it?
Okay, so for example, from the primary school level, we don't see our children as beings who have feelings, who have emotions, who go through depression and anxiety and all these things. So for me, I would want to see education happen from that level. I think the Ministry of Education needs to, and I am speaking with people how this is possible, that a counselor for every level or every division in every primary school is being assigned, because at the end of the day, our children are going through trauma like we have never seen before. They're being exposed to things in their daily lives that we have never seen before. I grew up in the south side of Belize, and to see how gun violence have affected children, I see that on a day-to-day basis, and to see that there is a lack of support. So there need to be a counselor assigned at every level for primary schools. At the high school level, we know that they have a counselor assigned, and they also have a peer helper program. I would also want to see that kind of amplified, kind of expanded to make it mandatory that every high school needs to implement this, because at the end of the day, once we become more sensitized to the conversation, then the conversation will become, or will happen more naturally. Take, for example, going left field here about the ICJ issue. Everyone was talking about it because at every level sensitization was happening, and that needs to happen. Also, the media needs to take the bull by the horn and have more open conversation, not from the point of view of professionals coming in to explain what mental health is, but from us advocates to speak on our experiences. There are people walk and talk every day, and they feel like they have to carry the lie that I need to carry these things on my own because my family is depending on me, not recognizing that you also need support. And you know, Dr. Bonilla said something quite interesting earlier. Even the mental health professionals are not seeking the help that they so justly need. And the thing is if you're going to be a mental health professional, because I've also gotten training in counseling, and one of the things, the first thing that they tell you, as a counselor, you have to have a counselor.
Yeah.
And it just the conversation needs to be happening from the developmental stages in children, help them understand emotions and the significance of emotions. I've always seen anger as a bad emotion, but anger is also something that tells us when something is wrong and when we need to adjust ourselves. But we have been a society that said something as simple as, well, if you feel angry, bottle it up, hide it, because you're not supposed to feel that
Repressing it
way.
is not going to help, because ultimately you're going to explode and the wrong persons are going to be affected by that pent-up anger. Let's go in a different direction. I'll take you on this, right? You mentioned earlier the media's responsibility in having the conversation. But what a lot of people don't understand is that we too have our baggage, so to speak, right? And it's difficult sometimes for us to uphold certain fundamentals if we ourselves are going through some of these issues. I'll use myself as an example. I believe 2012, 2013 was a most murderous year in the country's history, right? And as a reporter, I was covering sometimes 3-4 murders a day, right? Had a young family, right? And coming to work and going to cover this scene, that scene, the other scene. For some people, you get desensitized. For other people, you get hyper-sensitized, right? And after a while, I realized that while I'm able to manage at work and deliver the stories, at the end of the day, I'm completely mentally spent. Like, I can't do anything else, right? And so I can't go home direct, because then I'll be transferring that energy from the field to my young family, and it's unfair to them, right? But you're in a situation where the woman and the child are both excited to see you at the end of the day, but your day has been one of the heaviest because you're dealing with all of these scenes that will play through your mind when you're trying to rest and what have you. And so, like for me, and I'm not a psychologist, psychiatrist, none of the above, but I kind of self-diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder because I knew something was wrong, right? I didn't turn to any other vice per se, but I just knew something was wrong. And it's because of the level of exposure that I was having to covering these kinds of stories. Now, you could imagine the people who are direct victims or exposed to it by way of their family or what have you, what they must be going through. So if I am to uphold certain expectations and I myself am grappling with certain things by way of my job, it makes it all the more difficult. And I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm simply saying that we all have our load to carry, so to speak, right? And not all of us are strong enough to seek the help that we need. Some people bottle it up. Some people suffer in silence, so to speak. And when they do release, the release is aimed after at the wrong people, not necessarily the cause of what is creating this issue in you. I'll ask you, Khalia, to share with us what your turning point was. Because at some point you came to a realization where you decided you needed help, or you decided maybe I can help someone now once you've overcome that issue.
I'm really glad that you mentioned self-diagnosis, because I personally feel that For me, I used to kind of want to deny that there's something wrong with me, even though I know that I'm having these experiences, because I don't have a diagnosis as yet as to, you know, what specifically, but I don't have a name for it, even though I know that I struggle with bouts of depression. You don't have that official piece of paper saying it. But a lot of the time, self-diagnosis is a stepping stone to actually getting the help that you need, because you know what you're going through, you know what you've experienced, and kind of accepting that I know I'm not okay. That was my first step to not just treating myself and treating my mental illness and what I struggle with, but wanting to help other people. It's accepting, you know, it's okay to not be okay. Like, I had that moment, and in wanting to better manage my mental health, that was how I started to do the things that I need to be able to better function. Like we were talking about journaling and mindfulness and that kind of stuff. So for me, it was acknowledging that I'm not okay and there's nothing wrong, inherently wrong with that. That doesn't make me less than, and you know, it's completely okay. So that for me was my moment.
So, I mean, the three of you here are advocates. You understand what is happening to you and perhaps how you can help others. But in the line and in the grand scheme of things, the average civilian doesn't know where to seek help, or might think that they can't afford the help that they need. And yes, it is one of the bigger issues. So talk about awareness, talk about where can somebody seek these help. I know people know things like Mind Health Connect and so forth, but the average civilian can't afford $80 a session for therapy, right? So what can be done in this avenue to help these cases?
I think that I continue saying that the key is education, and you, like a journalist, can explain to the population that Ministry of Health is giving all that support by free, and because it's absolutely expensive. By example, if you are going to take CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, at least we need 14 sessions, 40 sessions of $100 by session. Another counselor is earning 120, 140. Maybe the people can do one or two, but they cut the therapy. The other thing is the cost of medication. In private, some medication that we are giving free to the people, they must pay $100, $200 every month for 1 year. It's very, very expensive. I think that the people is talking, the new generation is talking about mental health, but we need to reach the level that people must to normalize talking about mental health. Like I feeling flu, I feeling with headache, because mental health is a part of health. And only to that the people know that 1 in 8 person have a mental disorder. Don't mean that he's crazy, she's crazy. Absolutely no. Mental disorder can be anxiety, dysthymia, post-traumatic stress disorder, grief, pathological grief, anger management. All that issues are mental health. 1 in 8. Do you imagine how many people work here? 1 in 8 can have a mental disorder by statistic. Then we offer all that service free. And the people, the Belizean people, must to know that all this service is free. You can reach, you can get psychiatry support, you can get counseling support, the medications, social work support, free. If they have the money to go into the private, they are free to do it. But the Ministry of Health is offering that free, trying to reach the population. In every district, we have a mental health service. Every district in Belize, and the people must to know that.
And these are offered by the Ministry of Health.
Ministry of Health.
I want to end the segment in talking about what more can people do to help other persons. we have our advocates here, but sometimes somebody can be going through a suicidal episode and I am in the house. What can I do? What can I do to help? Or what can I do to help my friend who's going through severe depression? How can I aid them in the right direction?
Being you gave a scenario of a friend, as a friend, the most you can do is support, because therapy will be out of your hands. So the support would be by encouraging them to know that, listen, I'm here for you, and there is also help out there for you as well, and encourage them to seek that help. That's the main thing a friend can do. I won't be able to teach you skills here and say do A, B, C, but just support. As a friend, you know your friend. You know what that friend would allow, not allow, how far you can go, not go, how to go around little circles with your friend. So you just support your friend being a friend. All right?
Final thoughts from our advocates for mental health day.
I would just like to take this opportunity to encourage people to take their mental health more seriously. Just from my own observations, I would say that a lot of people, especially here in Belize, are very, very, very unhappy. We're dealing with a lot of trauma, and if you want evidence for that unhappiness, I would say, maybe just check out the comment section on a lot of things that happen in Belize, like, for example, KTV. And
humble brag.
And you see the type of venom that people spew on these platforms, and I can't help but look on that and think, these people are deeply unhappy.
It's all vitriol.
Yeah, and it's all just projecting and stuff like that. As a matter of fact, as well as we talk about the different generations, since I've started speaking more openly about mental health, I've gotten a lot of young people, younger people, what they call the Gen Zs and stuff, reaching out to me, asking for support, asking where they could find resources. A couple months ago, I did this teen summit that was held by the Belmopan City Council, and it was with high school age students, and one of the things that they asked was, what is something that they would like to talk about more? What is something that they would like more resources on? And one of the top responses from the hundreds of high schoolers was mental health. There is a huge need in our country to be more open about talking about mental health to the extent that we do about physical health. And I just want to encourage people to keep that in mind, to know that whatever you're going through, you're not alone in going through it. And it's like Kyla said, it's okay to not be okay. But it starts with being willing to face that, being willing to face what you're going through, being willing to, as she said, to own up and say, something is wrong. I need to talk to someone, I need help, I need to take accountability for how I'm feeling, and I need to heal.
Well, Alex relayed but I just want to kind of reiterate what he said, in that it's okay to not be okay, and our mental health is just as important as our physical health. So there's no reason why we should be ignoring it when we feel that something isn't necessarily right, or we're not feeling 100, so to speak, mentally. The resources are there, as Dr. Matos said. Sorry. The resources are there. We might not know about it as much yet, but they are there. So if you know that you need help, then I would say seek out that help, even if it's just in your surrounding community, that or a professional. The help is there.
Part of my advocacy is that I advocate for us to normalize hard conversations. And conversations around mental health is the hardest to have with those who are closest to us. And I think it's high time that our families and our friends be open-minded to these types of conversations, and that we be more genuinely welcoming to one another, because your experience is not my experience. Something that may seem like a light load to you may be the heaviest for somebody else. And I think we need to get rid of the judgment, and we need to be more cognizant of each other. Something as simple as sharing a smile or recognizing the feelings of others. Those are things that we need to do to make practical steps so that we can make this world a bit more livable. And I recently saw a talk about, TED Talk, about civility and how civility improves the lives of others when we're civil to one another. And it's so sad because Alex just talked about our unhappiness, and in another TED Talk they talk about when last did you smile. And for children, they said, oh, we smiled yesterday. And as people got older and older and older, you find that laughter became less and less frequent. And then it went up back over the age of 80. And then the average life expectancy is what, around 76, 78?
So you'll never get the laugh.
So you'll never get the laugh. So I think we need to find also areas where we can make people smile more and to have hard conversations.
Perfect.
I 100% agree.
If I can just say
Sure.
something. I'm so glad you mentioned that I tend to smile a lot, just so. But that's from childhood. But somehow, I live by this thing that at the end of the day, it's how you make someone feel. So, if someone feels a certain way around you, that's the energy they're gonna start, embedding and showing and what's up. Because if you give off an energy that is not acceptable, that person, you can see how it goes right down. So, yeah. Totally agree with that.
Thank you so much, Nurse Bonilla. Thank you, Dr. Matos. Advocates, thank you for being here this morning, but we are out of time. But no, we should talk more about mental health. Not everybody's business. But with that, we are going to take our next break, and we'll be back with our next conversation for this morning. So stay tuned.